Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Teacher Talk. I'm Lisa Bayless, and I'm so happy that you're here to learn, listen, and understand more around the concepts of things like mindfulness, self-compassion, well-being for ourselves. And today I'm really excited for our very special guest. This guest is synonymous with self-compassion around the world. So if you think of the research that's been done in the Western world lately, Dr. Kristin Neff's name has been on it. And I'm so thrilled she's here today to share a little bit about her experience, her journey around self-compassion, and why it's such an important practice for us as educators. Thank you, Kristin, for being here.
Sure, Lisa, happy to be here.
So you and I first met and got to the privilege to work together when we created a course called Self-Compassion for Educators Through Mindful Schools, which was a really fun and important practice, and still there for anybody who wants to go and continue to do this learning. And you were gracious enough to also write the foreword for my book. And one of the things that's been important for me is sharing this work with education or with educators. But I've noticed for you, one of the impacts that you've been sharing lately, and I know you have a new book out called Fierce Self-Compassion. And I want to just start there because I'm really curious about what moved you or spurred you to move from often what we think of self-compassion as the tender practices to want to talk more around this concept of fierce compassion. Can you tell me a little bit about what brought you into that piece and around research?
Yeah. So, so I've been talking lately about two sides of self-compassion. Tender side is about acceptance, really acceptance of ourselves as people, and also acceptance of our emotions. They arise, and with mindfulness, trying to not resist them. But although we want to accept ourselves, people sometimes get confused that does that mean we accept our behaviors, even if those behaviors are harmful? Or does it mean we accept situations we're in? We're just like, for instance, talk about teachers, throw a little self-compassion at them and just accept the situation that we're overworked and have too much paperwork. That's actually not compassionate. So if you really go down to the core of, what compassion is, it's concern with the alleviation of suffering.
Yeah.
And so we need to accept ourselves so we don't cause ourselves unnecessary suffering. But if we accept behaviors or situations that are causing suffering, it works against compassion. And so there's a whole action-oriented side of compassion, which is doing something, making changes, whether it's about our behaviors, speaking up, drawing boundaries, fighting for social justice, protecting ourselves, motivating change, which is all really crucial to self-compassion. So I thought we needed to bring more explicit attention to it because most people don't immediately think of the action-oriented side of compassion when they think about the word.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And educators especially, struggle with boundaries, putting boundaries up. They're natural caregivers. They're constantly being called to, support and give more. And I think that this lens around fierce compassion, this boundary setting, this, providing and protecting ourselves as an act of care, as an act of supporting ourselves is a different lens, right? I think sometimes we can naturally land on the tender side because we offer that to our students, to our colleagues. Like there's that natural caregiving piece that comes out, but sometimes the fierce seems a little bit of a rub. It's hard to get to.
Yeah.
Did you have any barriers when you started practice? Like does that make sense to you?
And especially my book is really focuses on gender role socialization and how that impacts it. So actually the reason I wrote the book was because I had kind of my own Me Too experience where I was working with someone who turned out to be a predator. And I was like, I actually have a lot of fierce energy by nature. And in a way that's gotten me in trouble because as women, people like, and by the way, I'm not talking about gender identity or biological sex, just socialization. People who are socialized to be women are not supposed to be fierce. They're supposed to be accepting. They aren't supposed to rock the boat. They aren't supposed to speak up. People don't like fierceness in people who are raised as women. And I really saw that in terms of what happened. And a lot of the women who were affected had trouble getting angry or they didn't want to rock the boat. And so really seeing this, I call it, is like mother and mama bear. And ironically, they're both prototypical female energies, but mama bear, that kind of fierce protective energy, which includes getting angry at injustice or getting angry if someone's trying to harm you or the people you love, that's all a really important part of self-compassion. And that's actually what spurred me to get involved. And it was also, I started writing it when it feels like forever ago, but it wasn't that long ago. The
I
Me Too
know.
movement, this whole movement of women saying, really, you aren't going to sexually harass us anymore. We aren't going to
Yeah.
take it. We aren't going to accept unequal treatment.
Yeah.
And so I'm writing particularly about women, but it's really any oppressed group. A really important part of self-compassion is standing up for justice. If
Yeah.
you're being oppressed or you're part of a group being oppressed.
And I think of this from the lens of education right now. And I think of a system that has, I mean, maybe we can use the word oppressed with it, or that has been, colonized and specifies to create a certain way of learning for so long. And people have gone along with it because it's, I've heard educators, it's what we've always done. It's what we do.
That's right.
And to be bold enough to step up and say, like, this is not okay. The system isn't working. It's not working for all of my staff and colleagues. It's not working for many of my students. It takes a lot of courage. And I hear you say, rock the boat. Like, lots of people don't want to do that, right? They don't want to stand up to other systems, people, things, because there's a fear around rocking the boat.
Yeah.
Did you come across this?
Yeah, well, and then the fear is real. We have to acknowledge that. So unless I'm teaching fear self-compassion workshops, and we talk about boundaries, and there can be consequences. You want to be wise. You don't want to like rock the boat or do something that's going to get you fired or make you lose your job. So you have to protect yourself in terms of how you draw the boundaries. What's really important is that we don't internalize the message that this is all we deserve, or this is how things should be. Because if you do that, then change will never happen. And a lot of the way it works is that, and this is again, gender role socialization comes in here. People like us when we're compliant and we say yes, and of course I'll do that for you. And they like us when we don't get angry or don't complain about things. That serves a system that historically has exploited women. And let's face it, education traditionally has been, a female-dominated field. I've even heard that female teachers get paid less than male teachers. So all this is still happening. And so it's just really important that even if maybe it's not wise for you to rock the boat in your particular situation. Okay, but at least you know what's right and wrong. And you know that you don't deserve to be treated that way. And then when the time is right, when it is safe to speak up, you aren't going to worry about, well, people may like me a little less.
I love this. And I'm also thinking from the lens of a classroom teacher, because when you said, we like compliance. Well, it's really easy in education to look out to a classroom of, 20, 30 students. And it's easy to love the kids who are compliant, that check the boxes, follow the things that we've done, make our lessons look really good. And it's our often most challenging students who rub us a little bit, right? Who aren't as compliant, who have their own voice in things. And my brain right now is thinking as an educator, how do we teach fierce compassion? How do we help this next generation know that they get to also have a voice and learn these balances? And I don't know that this is the big conversation for us today, but I can see this being so important in education.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the thing that ties both of these together is authenticity, right? So when you're fierce, that means you're being authentic. Now, maybe your authentic response is just to go along. Maybe that's true for you. And if so, absolutely. You don't speak up if it's not authentic for you. If some people giving is so much their true nature that, that is, again, fully what's to give more than to receive is the true for them. And that's fine. It's really when it's not authentic that it's the problem. When we're doing it for outside external reasons, either because of the system, or because we're afraid people won't like us, or we think we have no other choice, or really importantly, we think we aren't worthy of getting our needs. But when we know we're worthy and that, we have the right to be ourselves, then whatever's authentic for us has the ability to shine through. And so again, those students maybe who challenge us, if they are being authentic, you have to figure out why they're challenging you. But if it just comes from an authentic difference, or this is who they are, then learning to embrace authentic differences in our students, also in ourselves, that's really, I think, the key to self-compassion or self-love, self-acceptance. So isn't that interesting? We accept our authentic selves, which means the way we act may also may not fit in with the system. And is that okay? I didn't fit in with my system at the university, and there were penalties for that, but that was okay with me.
Because you were being authentic with yourself. And I think
exactly.
I love this lens around authenticity. I mean, it's always been a really important word for me, and how I've always chosen to show up in the world as authentic as possible. And I think you're right. When you start to accept yourself for who you are, when you go into that understanding and reflection of what do you believe in, what do you love, what do you value, it makes it easier to then show up in those ways as we move forward. And modeling that in education is, one of the most important things we can do these days. We know, kids can learn whatever they want to learn these days. Knowledge is like it's everywhere, but what's not everywhere is, really great human interactions, social lessons from the leaders that are there. And so now there's a different role educators have to play around, how do I model what it's like to accept myself, accept you for who you are? What does it mean to, deeply meet myself when it's hard, and care for myself in a way that I need to be cared for, so I can show you as students what that looks like too. And I think that this is a new way that we didn't have to used to know this in education. It's a different way of bringing things up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So I think as you're right, you're so right. It's crucial for teachers, but also for students.
Yeah.
And the best way to teach it to students is to model it.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that for sure. Have you felt any pushback or challenges throughout your career, and maybe even more so with this concept of fierce compassion, because of the socialization with it? Or where have you noticed some rub or some challenges in the world or in your research to this work?
Yeah. So, I'm not so sure people read my Fierce Self-Compassion book, like I say, in academia, but there was definitely, I didn't fit the cookie cutter mold of an academic. I taught pretty much just what I wanted to teach. I taught mindfulness and compassion courses. I didn't, my research, I didn't play the game the way it's usually played. And because I write about this in my book, because of that, when it came, I got tenure, but when it came time to be promoted to full professor, I wasn't promoted, even though my research was,
pretty widespread. Totally.
Yeah. Because I think I didn't play the game.
Yeah.
And I do also think, because I have a lot of fierceness to my nature, I think if I were a man, it wouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah.
I think because I'm a woman, people they love those women who, show up to be committee chair and I'll bring the cupcakes, and they still love that, still to this day. So I think that if I were a man, that it wouldn't have been a problem that I did my own thing. I think, and unconsciously, sometimes I spoke up at meetings, and maybe I was a little blunter than they thought I should have been. And I think, that gender role bias really played into people's perceptions of me. So, it's definitely, you might say in some ways it's harmed me, but it also, I can tell you, the fact that I have my self-compassion practice and I have no problem being authentic and being fierce, I know that's also what's propelled me to succeed in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask that question. I mean, that can be hurtful, right? Like there can be some, I'm not being accepted because I'm not this, gentle, soft woman, because I show up as a fierce. I have the same, a memory once where I was once told, don't be so aggressive. Women, men don't like assertive, aggressive women. And I thought, I'm a confident, courageous, bold woman. I love that part of me. And I know it served me. But I've had to overcome and manage that. What are some of the ways, can you share what practices or how you support yourself during those moments that it feels like you're not accepted or it doesn't feel easy?
Yeah, well, that's when you need to go back to the tender self-compassion, right? So the tender self-compassion is about unconditional self-acceptance and also accepting the pain of rejection. It does hurt. I cried for sure when I didn't get promoted to full professor because I thought I really deserved it. It not only does it play itself in work context, but really still so strongly in romantic relationships. All these, as you say, don't be too assertive, don't be too confident, don't toot your own horn. Whereas, people raised as men are supposed to do this. And by the way, just to shout out, people who are non-binary, they get it from both ways. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all about trying to put people in shoe boxes.
Yeah.
And if you don't identify with any of the shoe boxes, then you're like doubly constricted. Yeah. And so I think it harms everyone. By the way, it doesn't just harm people raised as women, but also men who aren't allowed to be tender or sensitive, and
Yeah.
that comes their emotions, and that can lead to a lack of emotional intelligence and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
sorts of problems, and so that's why in some ways lately I've been thinking that self-compassion is really a political act,
Yeah.
because it's radical authenticity, radical acceptance, choosing health and kindness and the alleviation of suffering over just trying to impress people or have people like you or endless, achievement. And when you start thinking this way, then you start making different choices politically and also in terms of how you present yourself to the world. And
Yeah.
I think it's so crucial because our world is changing. We're starting to focus on, anti-racism and the climate. And we're finally starting to say, hey, the old way of doing things isn't working.
Yeah.
And I think we need the tender self-compassion to hold the pain of it and to kind of give ourselves that unconditional acceptance, because people may not like it when we speak up.
Yeah.
And the fierce self-compassion is the empowerment to say, hey, we need to make a change. And so, for instance, education, the woman, my son's autistic, as you know, and I have a woman who works with my son, and she just started like this semester doing her first teaching hours. She's great. And she said, I don't think I can do it. I mean, literally, I think she's not going to do it because it's just so hard. She would be great. And it's such a loss to the profession because she's so wonderful with these special needs kids. But she says, I have too much paperwork. It's too stressful. I don't have enough support. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, And so, and I had to say, well, yeah, totally. You have to, I was heartbroken because she would be so good for people in the public schools, but she has to take care of herself. But we need to change the system. It's not just okay to, have compassion for the fact that you're overworked and have too many students and have no support and all your time is spent on paperwork. We need to change the systems so that they cause less suffering. That's an important sort of self-compassion.
And I'm so grateful to hear you say that because, and a system doesn't change overnight. And I have a lot of people come and say, self-compassion, is it just a fix on, is it a Band-Aid over top of all of the, challenges that we go through? And I often say, yes, or no, but, right? This is the beginning of the foundation that you create for yourself. And I'm a big believer that we're not going to change a system if we're always burnt out, overwhelmed, and exhausted. And the fact that the only way to change a system is to do it from the inside out. I'm a big believer that teachers actually have voice to make changes, even if it's small changes in their own classroom. But they're so overwhelmed and burnt out right now, they don't have the capacity to even start small where they're at.
Exactly. So systems do need to change, but how in the world are you going to have the resources or energy or mental space to make those changes if you don't have self-compassion? So again, what's the alternative? Like shame and self-criticism? Is that really going to help change things?
No. And yet it's what people try using all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a Band-Aid, right?
No.
But it does help hold pain. So it is a healing agent, but it won't make the pain go away. It's a way of being with the pain with more strength and fortitude, so it doesn't knock you over and drain you and overwhelm you, so that hopefully you can work to make systemic change. That is one of the big reasons I've started talking about fierce self-compassion, because it's not like I just sit on my cushion and love myself. Well, we need to do our work in the world, but it's going to be so much harder to do our work in the world if we don't have the resource of self-compassion.
Yeah. And I think this is where, when I speak a lot with educators, I see them, they have the tender practice that they're very good at giving other people. And then many educators actually already show up in a fierce way. They're good at, showing up, providing, supporting, doing things constantly, but to the point that they're not bringing back in that tender side. That they're not accessing both. And then they feel like they're just always in this vibration of give. And then there's little left, and they don't see it as fierce compassion. They see it as exhaustion. They see it as overwhelm. I've been polling educators for the last 5 or 6 years pre-pandemic. And the number one word I always hear from educators is the word overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed. As you said, I have more needs in my classroom. I have, kids struggling. I can't meet the learning needs. I have more students with, struggles and trauma in their background, and the paperwork these days. There's just so much. How do I do it all? And good people are leaving. So And I often say, I don't have a magic wand to change the system, but I do know that this will ground you so you can show up the next day, and then you can show up the next day. And our changes happen in micro movements and micro practices so that we can make macro changes over time. But, when you started these practices, did you see an impact in your own life around how you could hold these challenges? I mean, both in a system and in your own life?
Yeah, well, for me, it's about integration. It's like yin and yang. If you think of yin as the tender and yang as the fierce energy, it's about balance. You really need both. And they kind of do feel different in your body.
Yeah.
And so what really helped me, especially because in some ways I have more fierce than tender. You might say atypical for my gender identity. Integrating them was really helpful. So for instance, first of all, accepting, like if I got angry or had a lot of that fierce energy, but then integrating it with the tender. So like, it's almost like the both energies could flow. It didn't have to be just one or the other. That was really helpful for me.
Can you describe what that looked or felt like for you? So people who understand the concept, but don't actually know that embodiment of integration, what does that look or feel like for you?
Yeah. So, well, fierce energy is, it's like you feel it in your body. Like if you get angry or you're really upset or you're frustrated, you can feel it in your body. It's like kind of tension, but it's also movement. And so first of all, allowing that to be there, not judging it or suppressing it, just allowing it to flow through your body. And then the tenderness also, I might put like my hand on I might put like a hand on my stomach, just like support the strength, and then a hand on my heart. Just so kind of allowing that tender and fierce to both be there and to kind of merge and mingle. And it does sound a little abstract, and it is a little abstract, but you also can add language like, I'm here for you, I will support you, but also I care about you, I accept you, I believe in you, do the best you can. That's kind of the do the best you can, motivating the fierce energy. But if you fail, I'll still love you, so both of those messages you need simultaneously. If you're too tender without being fierce enough, you're complacent. But if you're too fierce without being tender enough, it's all about striving and change and getting done. We really do need both.
I love that integration. And I think that grows with practice. And I think people, when they first hear it, they're like, yeah, okay, I get it. But then the inner critic or the critical voice comes in instead of like those, like, I see you, I've got you, you're okay, dear one, or, you can get through this. Let's keep going. I think that the only way we're going to see those shifts is if we give educators that permission to, like, it's not going to be a quick switch. It's not you learn it and then you have to practice it. It's this, like, what voice are we attending to? How are we meeting that inner best friend as opposed to that inner critic? How are we shifting the permission for ourselves to slow down, connect with ourselves, and be bold enough to show up in the world? And I think you embody that. I'm so grateful that you're sharing it with us, because I think educators need to see that it can happen, right? We can do this work. It doesn't have to be exhausting, overwhelming. There may be moments like that, but it doesn't have to be tied into our identity as educators anymore.
Right. And and a lot of another feedback I get from teachers is, I don't have time. The thing is it actually takes less time and effort than shame and self-criticism. Think about all those moments when you ruminate, I can't believe I did that, or, like all the energy it takes, feeling that you're inadequate. And that takes a lot of time and energy. Just saying, okay, well, you're a human being, I'm here for you, I'll try again, actually takes less time and energy than the opposite. Self-compassion is a way of relating to any moment of suffering. It's not something you got to, you don't have to practice 30 minutes in the morning. You can if you want, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
Time to practice is when you're in pain. How are you relating to that pain?
Yeah.
And it's actually less energy and effort to relate to that pain in a supportive, healthy, kind way than in a non-supportive, cold, critical, harsh way. So people are already spending the time and energy and effort, but it's just so habitual, people don't see it.
Yeah.
It does take some effort to change a habit. So I'm not going to deny it. It's when the groove is well worn in your brain, it's easier for those neuronal pathways to get activated. So you do have to make some effort to change your brain patterns.
Yeah.
But the actual practice of self-compassion is less time and effort than the alternative.
Yeah. Oh, and I love that because I think you're right. Teachers always feel like time is one of those things that is scarce, right? We feel this scarcity mindset around our own time. And because we're pulled in so many directions and there's so many
That's right.
expectations and meetings and time things that we need to do. And so this recognition that actually, meeting ourselves in a way that promotes kindness and care takes less time
Takes
than
less
like
time.
you said, that
You can be
rumination of the
derailed by the
shame.
rumination or the shame or the self-critical thoughts. So let's say you're really, really stressed. You have a lot of things to get done. It's not like, okay, I'm going to take time out or I'm going to slow down. You may not have time to slow down, but at least you can say, this is really hard. Okay, well, as I do this, I'm going to just try my best. And I know I'm stressed, so I may not, get it exactly what I want. That's okay. I'll just be here for myself in a supportive way. That's actually going to make it easier to get it done than the alternative, which is like,
Yeah, totally. And I see this
which is the scientific term.
Yeah, it is such, you know what? I think most people can relate to that. It's exactly what it feels like. But and then coming back to this concept of modeling it in our classrooms, right? Like having a moment where we're kind of starting to, oh, it's noisy in here. I'm not learning my lessons off. Okay. Like I'm just going to do the best that I can right now. Let's go back to this. Hey, everybody, I noticed that we were all really noisy. We're off task. I know for me, it's making me a little bit overwhelmed here. And I'd really like us to reset. And I just know that when I can do this in this moment, I'm just going to take a deep breath and let's, as a collective, get back to where we need to be.
Yeah.
It can be that great to model to our students.
Wonderful to model it for your students.
Yeah.
I know oftentimes like some of my best teaching moments as a self-compassion teacher is when I've made a mistake, for instance, or I got something wrong. And then you just talk about it. And wow, this is hard and this is difficult, but okay, and then it's really modeling that way is much better than talking about it to people.
Yeah,
for sure.
I
And
agree.
you can practice it at the same time that you're modeling. So it's a win-win.
Well, and it's such a beautiful moment to do that. I had a moment where I was speaking to a whole bunch of administrators a couple of months ago, and I was talking and I was really engaged. And I said something like, remember in 2001, a couple of years ago when we were talking about this, and I paused and I could feel this flood of 2001 was 20 some years ago. It wasn't. And I actually paused and I said, I have to just tell you, I can feel my face getting red because I've just said something that seems ridiculous. And I'm just going to take a deep breath because I want to laugh at myself and I want to get into my critical voice, and yet it's not going to do anything. So let's just take a moment and laugh about my mistake and let's keep going. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can model that, doesn't matter where we are, can be so beneficial for kids, because kids don't always learn when we teach directly at them. They learn so much better when they can see it. They know what it feels like. They see other people doing it as a way of helping them regulate their own ways of being. And I think as a collective, if we want change, the more of us doing this in education, we're going to see those changes happen because we're going to gain that shared language. We're going to have support. We're going to get that common humanity, as you often share.
It'll
around
start
many of us
changing
doing
the
it.
culture. I mean, that's the thing, the culture. All most organizations, where any sort of service organization, especially, the culture often doesn't support self-compassion. So it takes individuals changing the culture, and individuals talking to each other and communicating to each other, and the culture can start to shift. The culture does shift from the inside out, not from the top down.
Yeah. And I love that. And I just want to do a shout out to all of those of you who are already doing that as those change makers in your school right now. And sometimes it feels isolating and it feels alone because you are one of the few. You're not alone. And there is a huge community of people who are trying to support you. So just reach out and recognize that, because I think sometimes being that change maker can feel very overwhelming and you want to see differences made and it's not happening at the speed that we want to see change. So just recognize we're really grateful that you continue to show up as a change maker in your school and take this work that, Kristin has researched, and we know that it makes an impact for us as an individual and as a collective. Kristin, thank you so much for giving your time today. I have one last question for you. It's kind of my fun way to end my conversation. So many people who know me know that one of the way I decompress and de-stress at the end of the day is I turn my tunes on while I'm making dinner, and I have what I call kitchen dance parties. And my kids now are 12 and 13, and I still drag them in to spin around the floors with me. If you had one song that would be your guilty pleasure, that if it was on, you couldn't not dance to, what's your guilty pleasure kitchen dance party song?
Okay, it's kind of a guilty pleasure because it's so old school, but Rick James Funkadelic. I mean, you could not, you'd have to put me in like chains not to move to that song. There's like so much from my youth. Like, yeah, anyway.
I love it. I love it. I think we all have those.
Funk. I just can't help but dance.
I love it. Well, Funkadelic is going to be on my playlist. I love it. And I'm going to, every time I hear it, I'm going to have my Kristin dance moves with you. I love it. I think we need that fun, right? And I think sometimes we all have those songs, those things in our life that go, oh, right, this brings me joy. And so, I mean, the way your face just grew in a smile, even thinking about that, I think it's such a fun piece. Well, keep doing your amazing work. I'm so grateful for you in this world. Thank you for leading so many of us and giving us permission to keep doing this work. I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. And thanks for being at the forefront of really bringing self-compassion to teachers. It's so needed. So I appreciate you as well.
You're welcome.